Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this General Government Committee meeting of October 6, 2021. May we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Dennehy.
Here.
Councilmember Gonzalez. Absent. Councilmember Jaquez. Absent. Councilmember Reed. Absent. Councilmember Schmischer.
Here.
Councilmember B. Smith.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick.
Here.
Mayor Smith.
Here.
Thank you. And tonight we're going to be discussing business licensing. And what we're doing is going over some of our codes to make sure that, that we have something that makes sense, is simple and understandable. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Ryan.
All right, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick. As you stated, we've been doing an overhaul of many different chapters of the code, and business licensing is one that's been on our to-do list for quite some time. There's a lot of stuff that's in this code that is either outdated or we don't do it anymore. Things have changed. For instance, security alarm companies, that was something that we did when dispatch was under the city, and we don't no longer do that now that we have a regional dispatch center. So there's quite a few things in here that just don't make sense anymore. And then there are other things that have come up over time where last year we moved to state collected sales tax, and we no longer issue sales tax licenses through the city. So one of the things that we're contemplating in here is to add a business license for businesses that have physical presence within the city limits. And part of that is twofold. We've got an economic development office, and knowing which businesses are in the community and having ways to connect with them from a building standpoint or a new business standpoint. There's currently no mechanism for a new business to come into the city, and we've had a couple instances where people start a new business and they go into a building and the use doesn't match what they're trying to do in the building, and there may be additional requirements or things like that. And from a business friendly standpoint, we want to make sure that we're helping guide people into the right buildings, or making sure they're starting their business with their eyes wide open, and what that might entail. And then the other side of it is, from a security, community, public safety standpoint and crime prevention standpoint, giving the police department and their crime prevention analysts information, business owner information if there is a break-in, or things along those lines, who that point of contact should be, and helping them with some of their crime prevention programs. I'm going to turn it over to Rick real quick, see if there's anything that he wants to add from a business economic development standpoint, and then we can turn it over to Cindy, because she's the one that does a lot of these licenses and has to deal with this on a daily basis.
Yeah, from my perspective, I'm very much a private sector guy, and I don't necessarily want to feel like businesses are coming into a community that's going to regulate them. But like Ryan said, we did have an instance where a business started up. They were advised by they referred to this person as an attorney. They were advised by a paralegal that they didn't have to go through our building official for their requirements. And we became aware of it, and it became an issue. And in a case like that, how do we capture that? How do we capture it prior to it becoming a major issue? Because that's one thing that really can stain the reputation of the city. It makes it look like the city's, getting in the way again. And that really wasn't the case at all. They were very ill-advised by their legal advisor, I guess we'll call her. Again, it's not anything that we want to use to regulate. as far as the business is concerned, it's just to learn about them. There's another positive side too. Again, when Chief Schick is here, he can talk more about that, but there is a plus to having a good community relationship between the police department and the businesses. And businesses recognize that, and the police department recognizes that. We want the police department to be much more involved with the community and involved with the businesses, not as regulators, but as partners. And the chief is on board with that. And one way to do that is to help him understand who these people are, where they are. And from the security perspective, yeah, it's nice to know who owns the building, who owns the business. But it's really more of a relationship building type of a concept that I don't necessarily look at permits that way, but when I think about the problem we had with that one business and conversations I've had with businesses about police downtown in particular, it kind of makes sense to know who they are when they come into the community. And it'll just help us help them a lot more and manage their expectations a lot better. That's my perspective.
Thank you for that. So Rick, how does our changes to the code that we're contemplating tonight in this general government meeting prevent or help mitigate someone who comes into the community and may have bad advice that they don't need a license or something like that? That still could be a problem, is that right?
It still could, yeah. I imagine we'll have people who won't apply for a license, or they'll be advised not to. But the more we can capture, I think the better off we'll be. I don't see anything in here that necessarily prevents a business from wanting to get a license. It's obviously for security, the stipulations are higher. For trash hauling, stipulations are higher. But business in general, we just need to capture as many as we can and really be able to help them. We really don't have an idea who's coming to the community and trying to start a business and just not because they thought they couldn't or they didn't seek help. We really don't know.
Thank you for that. Any questions from council at this point? Yes, Brandon.
I just have a comment. I do like the metrics, the positive metrics on actually being able to see these business owners. And just like on Monday, we honored Gennardo's, who's been in business for 80-something years. Mm-hmm. If we don't have some kind of a metric, we don't know how long some of these businesses have been here. We don't know, as council especially, when we're approached with questions like, we've been in business for 50 years, well, there's not a metric to where we can measure that. And I can say, too, from a business owner perspective, when you're dealing with suppliers, especially in my industry where you're licensed, they want the presentation of a business license to make sure that we're a viable, real brick and mortar business. And when I tell them over the phone, our municipality doesn't issue business licenses, they think I'm crazy. And sometimes it jams up the process when you're trying to get things into the community, especially from a retail perspective. Just a piece of paper saying, yes, we're a viable business sometimes is enough to kind of hinder some of those conversations. Also, just in reference to the business you're speaking of, I want to say they reached out to many special districts, like the fire district and all that, and there was already all this stuff in place, and we as the city had no idea on anything that was going on. So I do agree with you, Rick. I think it's just a measurement of what's coming in and what's new, and to reach out and shake a hand and say, welcome to our community is a great thing. And if you don't want to, apparently you don't have to, but that piece of paper I think is super important for some industries.
I'd much rather manage the business owner's expectations than come after the fact and realize we could have managed it better.
Right. Exactly. Thank you, Brandon. Amy?
Thanks so much, Mayor Pro Tem. Could I ask, what conversations have you had with local businesses thus far? What has their input been in the drafting of this?
I haven't had any conversations with businesses yet. This has really been more of an internal discussion about how we can capture this activity. This would be the first that it's going to be out there.
Okay, because I think that having those conversations, particularly, with the chamber, with FEDC, and with the industries where significant changes are contemplated, like the tasting rooms, I know a couple local businesses do that, and pawnbrokers, I think getting that input will be really, really important before we move this really any further. And I did just want to follow up on one comment that Councilmember Smith made. Is that the case? So if a business doesn't choose to seek a license, are there any repercussions or ramifications for them?
It depends on the business type. Most of the time when we see somebody coming in, they're talking to either Cindy about a liquor license or to see if there's a license involved with their business. Usually something like a liquor license, they know they need to have one. Or we may find out about it through a building owner who goes to the building official, or maybe Patrick about zoning or something like that, or signage or something. There's not one consistent way of finding out who's trying to do what. And when you're dealing with business owners who want to hold their information as confidential as they can, there's even hesitation internally for us to talk about it with other departments because, it's not their wishes yet, or they're not at that point. So if we can get to a point where we can capture it and guide somebody through the entire process, that would be much more manageable and much more, I think, beneficial to the businesses and the community.
Sure. I guess what I'm wondering about is for those businesses that don't require a liquor license or don't require a zoning change or don't require anything else, this new ordinance would now require all businesses to get a license. And that is a pretty big change in our community. So what I'm wondering about is if there's any negative ramification to a business that does not seek to get a license. Because there is a fee involved, there is regulation involved, we can deny their license. So I'm wondering about what that looks like.
So there are penalties, and we could bring them into court and ask them to cease running their business until they get a business license, and they can be subject to the fines of the municipal court. So there are enforcement mechanisms in there. So it's not, if we catch you without a license, we may choose to enforce our code. So, and if I can, just really quickly, I wanted to say something about the pawnbrokers. So that's state law. That's just making our code in compliance with state law, so they should be doing all of that right now. So that should not be a major change for them if they're complying with the law. So I just wanted to clarify that.
What month was it that we went to state collected sales tax?
January of this year.
So prior to January, we had a city sales tax license, and this wasn't as big of an issue at that point because there was, through sales tax licensing, there was a little bit more of a metric on this, but now that it's all state collected, it's kind of, like you said, it's kind of all over departments.
And we discovered too, on an analysis early on, I think toward the end of last year, that the numbers of businesses that we knew about was significantly different than the number of businesses registered with the state. Now, the question that I have and the concern that I have is that we define business in such a way that we capture things that maybe shouldn't be captured. But I think that's more of a definition, and I've commented on that, and that's something that we'll probably talk some more about, I suppose. But I hear what you're saying, and I tend to agree that there's probably some that shouldn't be captured. But as far as brick and mortar businesses, goods and service businesses, for sure, I think we need to know. I think we need to know who they are, where they want to go, and help them establish according to the guidelines of our requirements as a city.
Yeah. Do you mind if just following up on this, as a fee-based schedule, is this going to be based on size, or is this a flat fee for every business in town?
Yeah, you want to discuss the fee schedule? I don't have that in front of me. Do we have one?
That's outside my,
I say, yeah, it refers to fee schedule a lot, but there
Yeah,
isn't
it
one
refers
in
to- there's
here.
not
I
one
didn't
in
see
here.
I
it.
don't know that we've developed the fee schedule, but the idea was a flat fee schedule.
Okay.
How would you enforce this?
So if I may,
Yes.
Madam Mayor, I have a question that I think takes us right into that.
Okay.
And if I understand it now, as of January 1st, the business tax licenses that were issued by the city essentially became void because we were no longer requiring a business tax license for businesses.
The sales tax license, yes.
Yeah, sales tax license. But with the implementation of these regulations, now, this says, "No person shall establish, engage, or be engaged in a business without first obtaining a business license as required by this chapter." So that means that essentially every business, as we have defined it, will have to get a business license now that they have not had to have in the past.
Correct.
And so what will be our outreach program to, to let businesses know, do you have some thoughts about a grace period, or what do you see as far as implementation goes?
Yeah, so, as far as implementation goes, that would be a function of the economic development team and maybe even, maybe lean a little bit on crime prevention and maybe some outreach from the PD if they were willing to do that. But I think, it's going to be, social media, it's going to be personal contacts, it's going to be mailers or postcards to let people know that these, that this change is coming. And it would be similar to what we did with the change in the building regulations, the new building code, where we would have a phase-in approach and a grace period.
Do you, along those lines, one of the obstacles for small businesses, of course, can be any fees associated with this. So with a flat fee schedule, are we thinking a minimal fee, as?
Yeah, I think for our sales tax license, it was $20, and, thinking something else similar right along those lines.
Right along those lines? Okay, thank you. Did that answer your question, Madam Mayor?
I want to say, I think I paid like $16. Like it wasn't all the way to 20. But at the same time, I know that I've filled out a couple of different pieces of paper for the PD on point of contact for burglaries, and I mean it's kind of a pain in the middle of the day to stop work and fill out a piece of paper when it could be on file with my license. I think that would be definitely a better system as far as for you guys.
Well, I agree, Councilman, and in this grand scheme, we talk about community partnerships, and obviously, we want to have that footprint established with our business owners because they need our support. So, when we talk about this licensing procedure, we talk about things like, as you indicated, not having to fill those out, at inopportune times, but basing our data off of those registrations and then being able to follow up and make those contacts on a scheduled basis so that we can update our information and talk about what problems exist, those types of things. We have the capacity to memorialize all that information in a secure network in our RMS. What we're thinking is through the registration process, we can start getting in on the front end in terms of developing those relationships, and we can talk about identifying those persons of contact for after hours, having that emergency contact list available to us, a first, second, third tier, if you will. So we have some redundancy built in. If the first person's not available, we go down the list. Surveillance system contacts, well, you know, I've seen a number of times where, you know, we're out there at 3 o'clock in the morning trying to investigate a crime, and we notice that there's cameras associated with the business. Well, who's in charge of the surveillance? For a lot of business owners or corporations, it may be an off-site facility that we need to contact, or it may need to be one of those emergency contact persons. But being able to get our hands on that video and see what exactly transpired could be, you know, instrumental in whether or not we solve a crime. We've talked about also trespass authorization letters, so that if we have people on the business owner's property after hours, we can, as an agent, so to speak, of the business, enforce that trespass on their behalf, and not have to call them, wake them up, come down here, do you know this person, how did, you know, those types of things. So we're trying to think down the road to make this a benefit as much as it may come across as a burden. And, you know, then once we have this all established, we can build in an annual update requirement where our crime prevention people can contact them. You know, is this still the persons of contact order? Has there been any changes in security? Those types of things.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we've had situations, or more so the PD has had situations where there's been a break-in, or, you know, an open door is found, and the contact information that we have is out of date, and they can't get a hold of the building owner or the business owner, and you know, they have nowhere to turn in those instances.
And that's a struggle for those officers, particularly in situations like that. You find an open door, or you have an alarm that's gone bad and it's just going off all night, and we don't have any idea who to contact. So that would certainly help streamline those struggles for us.
Absolutely, and we all know that, you know, effective crime prevention is time dependent. And a lot of times the quicker that you can learn things, the quicker crime can be prevented or identified, or whatever the case may be. And so that's a laudable goal. I know you mentioned that Cindy probably wants to talk to us here. Why don't we hear from Cindy? I know I do have some other questions that we can get into, but Cindy, have you got something that you would like to say to us?
Hi there. I think my biggest thing is right now we do not, aren't able to follow a lot of the rules that are in there. And so it would be nice to get that all streamlined. I also get calls from most businesses asking about a business license. And like Brandon said, wanting a business license so that they can turn it in to say that they're a business. And we don't have that ability at this point. So it would be nice to have that where people do have that form that says the city recognizes them as a business, because I probably get 5 or 6 calls a month in that regard.
From a new business standpoint, you know, I think Rick mentioned it, you know, Cindy alluded to it, is, you know, when there's businesses coming from outside of the community, they expect there's some type of business licensing requirement.
And that would be nice during this implementation period to get everybody on the same page, so that everyone knows of the expectation, so that when you're coming in with a new business, perhaps you can, the people around that new business person can say, oh, don't forget, you know, the city requires a business license. Amy.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I just wanted to thank you, Administrator Stevens, for clarifying that the fee schedule is, I mean, $20 is rather de minimis, so I'm glad that that won't be a barrier to entry. And thank you as well, Chief Schick, for outlining kind of the specific benefits that businesses would receive from getting this kind of license. And Cindy, as always, thank you for clarifying just how much demand there is for a business license. One of my other, I guess, main questions or concerns, in addition to like, let's get business owner input, is about the appeal process. Because up front, it says that the licensing official has the authority to deny license application. It doesn't really go into detail about why they would deny it, and also how somebody would appeal that kind of denial. And then I also just noticed that throughout, in multiple places, the person making the decision and the person that the appeal would be going to are both the same individual. And I just think that we would want to have more of a structured process so that folks aren't appealing decisions to the original decision maker. Thank you.
So is it correct, Catherine, this provision that we're talking about where you're referring to the appeal to the licensing official, isn't that in the liquor code?
So, yeah, I just want to make sure we're talking about the same section,
Sure.
sorry.
So Catherine, my first comment is about 502060, authority to deny license application, and that's on page 2. And there, I don't think it has an appeal process. It just says that the licensing official can deny. So when we're talking about something as fundamental as the right to start a business, I would want to make sure that we had a process in place. for
So you would
this.
like to see an appeals process? Is that what you're, okay, just want to clarify.
And then I can flag the specific sections, but in a couple of other places, it has, I believe, the city administrator making a decision. And then also, so for example, section 15 under 530-140, penalties and enforcement, it has the city administrator, section 15B, page 34. The city administrator may suspend or revoke any license after written notice to the licensee and the opportunity for a hearing before city administrator. So, and that's repeated a couple of times, and I just think it's important that if you have somebody making a decision, that you're appealing it to a different body. Thanks.
So in I kind of raised a similar question, because in some places, the licensing official makes the decision, and the licensing official hears the appeal. And so, if it's all right, I'll read your comment to me. Is that all right, to help throw some light on this,
My
Catherine?
comment to you? Okay.
It says that the city could appoint a hearing officer. We discussed this in part in the context of liquor licensing and having liquor licenses go to a hearing officer and not to council. That was the comment I was referring
Yeah,
to
yeah.
actually earlier. On the other hand, I'm not sure how many revocations there might be, so it may not be an issue that needs addressing. But nonetheless, if someone is denied a license, it seems to me that there does need to be a sort of appeal process layered so that someone has, so that a person that has been denied a license can go to someone other than the person that made the decision.
Okay. So the revocation's a little bit different. So on the revocation, just to walk you through it, so there'd be a notice of possible revocation issued to the licensee, and then that revocation would be heard by the administrator. But the administrator is not necessarily the one who would be maybe approving the license in the first place. Like, those are two things going on at two different times. Do you understand?
But, so you're talking about on page 3 in 5.02.100?
No, I was talking
revocations?
about the section that she has.
So back
Amy
on
had
page
pointed out, yeah.
34. So there's also revocations mentioned on that page that is solely to the licensing official at this point. But back on page 34, revocations, that's where your comments were?
Yeah, so we can change the revocation at the beginning to go to the administrator if you would prefer, rather than the licensing official. That's what I'm hearing. And you want an appeals process for the denial?
By the licensing official, yes.
Yes. Got it.
Does-
Sorry, if the administrator is making the initial decision, it wouldn't be appealed to the licensing official.
No, the licensing official is making the original decision. The
Okay.
revocation would be heard. A revocation would be heard by the city administrator, and an appeal of the denial of the permit in the first place would be heard by the city administrator. We want to split the people making the decisions. I think I got it.
Yes.
So it might just be okay, I think I understand. And then it might just be a wording change. So in all instances, it's the licensing official in the first instance, and then the city administrator is the appeal.
Okay. I do have another concern that, so 5.02 is our licensing procedures.
Mm-hmm.
And 5.04 is for, let me see, business licenses in general. And 5.08 is security guard services. And 510 is trash hauler. And then 514 is pawnbrokers. So those are the licenses we're talking about here tonight. And so the license procedures apply to all of the categories of licensees. So really 504, 8, 10, and 14 are all licensees.
Unless there's something specific in those sections that apply to those licenses, yes.
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So under business licenses, which is specific for businesses and not a security guard or a trash hauler or a pawnbroker, we define business, and some of these comments I have previously submitted to Ryan. He's kindly provided me some answers. But business means any kind of vocation, occupation, profession, enterprise, establishments, and all other kinds of activities and matters, together with all devices, machines, vehicles, and appurtenances on any premises in the city or anywhere else within its jurisdiction. So that's the definition of business. And the problem, when I read that, I said, oh, gee whiz, that's awfully broad. I'm concerned that for instance, that definition could, although it's an imperfect example, sweep in a bank teller or a pastor. A pastor is a vocation. And so if someone is I felt that we needed to get something in there about goods and services or, being provided for enumeration. Ryan had some suggestions that depending on what where city council wanted to go. And maybe I should read those, Ryan, would that be okay to read those? Okay, he says, I think this could be discussed more and we can change it based on council's direction. Depending on how broad or narrow we want to go, I would think that we could look at a description that includes where tangible product transactions occur, including sales and distribution, as well as when personnel or professional services are conducted on site. For example, product distribution could cover home occupation businesses where someone is running an Amazon store out of their garage. In a case like this, there may be little or no transactions locally, but truck delivery traffic in a neighborhood could be increased substantially due to distribution. Another example would be for personal or professional services on site, could cover instances where hairstylists have an at-home salon. And so there's, so I think in answer to your question, does, where would council go from my perspective? I would like to see some of the language that you suggested in here. I don't have problems with it being broad, but it should be definable so that a person could read this and say, oh, that means me. Other than maybe the kid with the lemonade stand or something like that. Although I think we have provisions for that otherwise
We do.
in our
They're
code.
not, yeah.
So that's another imperfect example, but
Although for home-based businesses, there are some businesses too that they don't do business in their home. They go out and they can say it's a cleaning service. That's another people's, they deliver food, like prepared meals to their customers. That's a little bit different.
so, yes.
I was going to ask, so how do you feel about including nonprofits in here? You are permitted to exclude them, so we can definitely exclude them, specifically exclude them. from this definition.
The only thing I think is that we have so many nonprofits, and one of our biggest things is that it's nice to know who our nonprofits are, so we know who to reach out to and
Okay.
how to collaborate together.
And they can have security concerns also.
Yeah, that's true.
Then
don't know
I
if they-
would, oh,
Maybe
sorry.
not give a permit fee for them or something.
You could do that as well.
Then if we are going to include them, I would just ask that in the same way that we seek input from businesses, that we seek input from nonprofits, so that we're making sure to take their concerns into account, because I think this would be very, very new for them.
I don't think it's gonna be so new, because up until January of 2021, we had a licensing process through sales tax. So business owners, I think when we went to state collected sales tax, were under the understanding that they were going to have to file for a business license. At least that's how I took it personally. So I think it's only been 1 year since we had to pay that fee for the sales tax license that was technically our business license at the time. So it's not, I don't think it's gonna be so new and so blindsiding as it is just something new and something different. But at least I've had multiple business owners ask me, when do we file for the business license? So I think everybody's ready for this to come. It's just getting the word out more than anything.
But for nonprofits, I don't think that they would have
Yeah.
been part of the sales tax, so I
And
think it would be.
certain services wouldn't, like law firms, we don't have sales tax, so.
Really?
Really, Tim?
That takes it into a different category if they have to collect sales tax. So yeah, I think it's really important to make sure that we can be specific about who we want to see get a license. I'm okay with nonprofits requiring a no-fee license for nonprofits. I mean, from my perspective, it's really a public safety situation where the business license connects with our law enforcement activities in such a direct fashion that it provides security for them and certainty for our officers if they go to a location and say, well, something's happened here, but who do I talk to? And so we are a small town, I realize that, and maybe it's not 6 degrees of separation here, but maybe 2,
I think that'll be an important part of the education process, though, that this is, a big part of this is public safety and not we want government to have their hand on everybody in town. I
Right.
mean, that's not the intention here.
Exactly, yes, yes. On page 7, I've got just a typo. Under A, security guard service, the end of the sentence is kind of hacked up.
Mayor Pro Tem, do you want us to go in order? I've got a couple of little things throughout as well. It's
Oh,
up
sure,
to you, though.
should we just go page by page? Yeah, sure. Why don't we do that? So that was my first comment, other than we previously talked about the licensing official and the definition of business. But yes, did you have something?
I was just wondering on page 5, 504020, the exceptions to license requirements. C3 is any business not conducted from a permanent location, and I wasn't sure if we're trying to capture things like food trucks or. We're trying to capture things like food trucks or, all businesses. I was just wondering about the thought behind that one.
I just drafted what I was told to draft.
Like Tim said, I think we capture them somewhere else. What we were trying to avoid was, we have businesses that do business in the city that don't have permanent locations within the city boundaries. So the regulation was designed, or the business license was designed to capture those who have permanent locations within the city limits.
So, an example of that, if I may, could be someone who shovels snow off your driveway. You know, when we do have snows, I get people that come around to my house and say, hey, do you want to shovel my driveway? And that would be a business conducted not from a permanent location. So they would be exempt, as I understand it. Is that your view too?
I was actually thinking more of internet sales, but
Well, what about like temporary sales, fireworks, farmers markets, things like that? People that may, maybe the farmers out in the county, they don't have a location in the city, come and sell their stuff, like, they would not need a business license. So,
right, and we have other regulations for temporary sales through the zoning code.
Okay, so did that, that was page 5. Anybody have anything on page 6? Okay, page 7, I made my comment. Looks like the end of that sentence is a little hacky. Page 8, anybody have anything? And how are we doing on time? Oh, we've got 20 minutes. Okay, page, yes.
Sorry.
Mhm.
Just on page 9.
Yeah.
B2, the character, reputation, and past conduct of the application is applicant is unsatisfactory. I was just wondering what would be covered in that's not covered in number 3, which is about felonies, misdemeanors, ordinance violations. Because it seems to me like 3 is like proven in a court of law or proven, and page 2 may be more, or number 2 may be more hearsay or reputational. So just curious about that.
yeah, so 2 is kind of, maybe they've misrepresented something on an application before, or they've lied about something else, or they have a reputation of, in the community as being untrustworthy, or, in this case, the security guard company hasn't had a good reputation or character in the community. It's very similar to liquor licenses and medical or marijuana licensing. And you're right, so 3 is the really like solid convictions. And 2 is kind of that reputation and character, which is a little bit
And
grayer.
Two has happened before where we've seen misrepresentation on an application.
Yeah. For a security guard.
Yeah.
So,
How many security guard companies do we have in the city? Do you know?
Cindy, do you happen to know offhand how many security guard companies we have licenses for?
I think currently we have, well, I just had a couple changed names, and I think there's 4.
4. Okay. Anything else on page 9? On page 10, I had a couple of comments. Under C there, towards the bottom of the page, the security guard service must provide, such notification shall provide the names of the guards. Is that what we intended there, I think?
yes, that sounds better.
Okay, and then under D, the security guard service must supply an operational plan prior, and several sentences there, but the end of it says, and any other information deemed necessary by the city, and I would like to see added at the end of that, or the police department, to give the chief a chance to have input there too.
He's covered by that.
Is he covered by that, by the
Yep.
city? Oh,
And
good.
it would come from him.
All right. I'm good then. Anybody have a comment on that was page 10, page 11?
Just on page 10, at the very top, number 3, it says that, essentially it's saying 10 years if you have a conviction, 5 years if you've been imprisoned for that. And I'm wondering if it should be flipped, because I think we would be more concerned about, for a longer period of time, if somebody had actually been imprisoned versus a conviction.
So it's 5 years from the imprisonment, which means they've served time, and then 10 years from the conviction. So I think it's correct. It could be 10 for both. I mean, you can change the 5 to 10, but presumably they've been in prison for a period of time, and then it's 5 years from that, as opposed to just a conviction from 10 years. Does that make sense?
So as it is, conviction is 10 years, and, or if they've been imprisoned to any such conviction at any time within the 5 years immediately preceding. And so what that does, the clock starts on conviction for 10 years. But it is reset upon being imprisoned. Is that right? Would that be, am I reading
Well, it's
that?
set 5 years from the end of the imprisonment. That's how I read that.
Is it the end of the imprisonment?
I read it as 5 years immediately preceding the filing of the application.
Yeah, has been in prison with respect to some such conviction anytime within the 5 years. So I read that as the 5 years is triggering from the imprisonment, but I think I see what you're saying now that I'm talking out loud, is the imprisonment included in that 5 years? Yeah, we can
So
tweak that. Are you still okay with the 5 and 10 part? Okay.
any comments on page 11? Yeah. that's, you're being way too strict with ourselves here. Page 12. Did you have anything there, Amy? I did. Go ahead.
You might have
Please go
some of
ahead.
the same, just on item A on the top, just the sentence connecting service certifies, and then there's a red line provides the city, so it just needs to have a correction there. There's several of those connections between red lines that probably need to be cleaned up.
We'll fix that.
So I fix that by deleting certifies,
Yeah.
okay? Who is the certification entity that licenses firearms or licenses security guard firearms?
That's a great question, Pro Tem. I researched this issue, and there's no central state authority that regulates firearm certification for security guards, period. And there's no certification for firearms, for armed security officers. So industry best practices would be security corporations that offer those services, those training services to certify their personnel. NRA offers firearms courses for users and instructors. So the spirit of this ordinance here is to bring some consistency and accountability, make sure that we're putting people out into the community that are reputable, that are well-trained, that are professional. So again, it's just coming back to some consistency, professional services. We want to make sure that they're certified to industry standards. We want to make sure that there's clear lines of operational procedures, and that we're distinguishing them from police officers so there's no confusion in the public eye.
Chief, is there a way to provide a list of acceptable entities?
There are, yeah,
Okay.
and in that follow-up email I sent, I think Denver had some references. I looked at Colorado Springs, and their ordinance is very broad. I mean, it categorizes all of the certifications required. So yes, there are those opportunities for us to find
Okay.
that information.
That would be great. My question is not intended to say that we don't want security guards to be, professionally trained or whatever. I mean, we do. But the question was who? Well, if I was going to start a security firm, who would I turn to give me some type of piece of paper that said,
I think
Had
I
some
would
training.
steer you towards the security industry's best practices. They have those protocols. They have groups that certify officers. I was a little surprised to find out that Colorado doesn't have something that offers some guidance in that area.
well, the sheriff just used to give a badge to
I-
the guys,
Yes, sir, I do.
Let's go get the bad guys, right?
Posse.
Right, exactly. Then on B, it says, security guards shall not arrest any person except as permitted by law for any citizen. And I didn't know what for any citizen meant.
I think it may be referring to citizen's arrest, so except as permitted for any citizen to arrest.
Was that the intention?
Yes, I believe that's the intention. Are you okay with that, Chief?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, just want to
Sorry.
make sure.
So it.
Because that's in the code now, so, yeah.
Yeah, great. For me, the question is, what this doesn't do is this doesn't empower security guards to make arrests for some crime or some perceived crime that is not allowed any general citizen under the citizen's arrest powers.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem. For serious matters, garden variety matters, no. And then we go back to establishing, because you had mentioned earlier about operational guidelines or operational plans per se. Those are the types of things that we'd work out ahead of time so that they know exactly where their arrest powers start and stop.
That's great. That's good. I really like that. Then in the next paragraph, I had a comment there, and it was just a word choice that was bothering me. It says security guard services, this is in D, shall not provide security guard uniforms that are deceptively like any uniform worn by law enforcement agency. And I understand the clear intent is that there's a visible difference between a certified law enforcement officer and a security guard. But rather than saying deceptively, I would say similar to, and I would also add to the end of that sentence, as determined by the chief of police, so that you can act as a valve and say, oh, wait a minute, that uniform looks awfully like the one I'm wearing right now, so that'll be out of bounds, you know. And I would like you to have that ability and authority to say, nope, I don't like that uniform.
Well, thank you, sir.
I think that the next sentence in that paragraph kind of does that, because it says the chief of police shall regulate the style. So it starts to get there, but couldn't agree more. And maybe even changing it to the positive in terms of security guard services shall provide security guard uniforms that are visibly different from, if that's what we're
I like
seeking.
that.
Yeah, sure. That sounds great.
I do like that better.
Okay. Any other comments on page 12? Oh, my goodness. Oh, we're going to get through
Got
tonight.
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Is this something that we can continue? Because there's some things that I want to have some discussions about. that-
Sure, what?
Well, it'll be longer than 5 minutes.
Oh, so you're saying maybe continue this one?
Yeah, well, I'll turn to Ryan. I know we have a pretty full schedule, but.
Yeah, absolutely. We can have additional discussion about this. I think if there's any, like typographical or, wording changes, those can be sent and we can take a look at those individually. But, if there's things that we need to discuss more, absolutely, we can have an additional session on this.
Okay. Well, let's just flog ahead then and see where we get to, and we'll stop here in a couple of minutes because we will need a short break to get everything organized. But on page 13, under A1, says the following reasons may be grounds for revocation: that the licensee or any employee of the licensee, and we're talking about security guard services here, right? I don't know, that may be clear enough from the section.
I definitely did go back and is this just in security guard services? So I had the same initial question as you did, John, but when I saw that it was in security guard services, I thought that was appropriate.
Right. And I had some other comments, but I think that my comments were trying to limit the role that security guards played in relation to our law enforcement officers, that they didn't become de facto law enforcement officers. But I'm convinced by a comment that I received from the chief of police that we don't have to worry about that these words that we have here are probably good enough. Any other comments on subsequent pages? My next one is not back to page 17.
On 15, under 510020, license required, B1, it lists a lot of different types of nonprofit organizations, civic, community, benevolent, charitable. And given the length of the list, I'm wondering if we would also want to add in religious, just to make it clear that they're also covered.
Add which?
Religious.
Oh. I'm good with that. Anything on 16? Then on 17, at the bottom of the page, there's a typo there, upon renewal of the license, under C. Something else I've got, let's see, we have another minute or two.
I have something on page 19.
Sure.
And Chief, this is kind of for your consideration. I don't think we'll make might not be able to make a decision today. But for pawnbrokers, under a previous chief, there had been some pretty extensive discussion in the community and to city council about expanding that to coin dealers and maybe other businesses that accept, like buy used items that could frequently, or could be considered stolen. And so I don't know if this would be a proper time to think about that again. I think under your leadership, you may have some different opinions about that. And under that same conversation was on 20, on C, it says, upon receiving a written request from the chief of police, the licensee under this chapter shall, before noon of every day, provide a full, true, and correct transcript. And then it doesn't really say for how long, like, is that for the rest of forever? Is it during a certain period of time when there had been maybe a crime? It was a little bit in the, up in the air. But also, on the previous discussion about maybe expanding pawnbrokers to other potential businesses that resell used items, was uploading to, I can't remember the name, but it was to a place where they could upload what they had sold and put it in a database that the police can see, so if they're researching crimes, they can see what had been bought by these dealers.
Yes, and that database is still active.
Yeah, but we don't, but this doesn't talk, this just says, having a written request from the police where they would just automatically, at the end of the day, upload those purchases. I don't know if that's something we want to do, but I definitely wanted to get your opinion about that.
Well, I will research the issue and have an opinion for you next time we meet, Madam Mayor.
And then on page 22, on item 4, it talks about, this is for, it looks like it's probably like for under the bars, or those who sell liquor, and it talks about, on item 4, that they cannot adversely affect public health, the welfare or safety of the immediate neighborhood, and that talks about fights, violent activity, or disorderly conduct. But we have also had at some of our local establishments also issues with drug sales and drug use. Didn't know if we should include that in that as well.
So that's a state definition,
Okay.
straight out of the statute and I would say that drugs falls under that one.
Okay.
Yeah, it's intended to be very broad.
Okay.
so.
I want to say there was a big backlash on some of on that pawnbroker one. There was some unrest on some of the definitions.
It had to do with secondhand property
Yeah.
and secondhand dealers. And we
Yes.
had combined them under one ordinance. I don't know if you remember that. We had an ordinance. And so per direction, we took the secondhand dealers out completely. So they're being removed. But
Right, so it wasn't like, if you buy used clothing or
Right,
kitchen items, whatever that, it was more
Couches,
just, like
chairs.
if you buy silver coins or lots of like authentic jewelry with the
yeah, it
real-
had a
Yeah.
value, it was of a certain value. I think it was $30 or it had a serial number and then there was a list of exclusions. So it's a difficult definition to kind of work around. And I think that was part of the issue as well, is trying to help secondhand dealers figure out where they fall in that definition was
Yeah, so I don't know if we want
challenging.
to conquer that, but I definitely wanted to get your opinion about
Yeah,
that,
and-
because there were some instances in our community where that was an issue.
Yeah, and we remove the secondhand dealers and under the assumption that if it becomes an issue again within the community, that we could revisit it.
I am wondering though, under the definition section on page 19, pawnbroker, the way that it's defined is pretty broad. So I don't know if that's also from state statute, but I think the way that
Yeah.
the way that it reads right now, it could include secondhand, or coin dealers or others, I think.
So contracts for purchase and purchase transactions aren't defined here, but they are under state law. We can certainly add those in. I think that might refine who a pawnbroker is. So we can add those in.
That
No
would be
problem.
great, thanks.
Great. And let's conclude unless someone else has something else to say. I think we should conclude this because we've got to do some shuffling up here to get ready for our next meeting. And with that, we're adjourned.